Next, taxation, part 1, continuation. Okay? Another is the persons affected. Sa taxation, sino bang naapektuhan? Of course, the community or a class of individuals. Okay? Sa eminent domain naman, syempre, yung private property owner only. Kung sinong may-ari nung kukuning private property, yun lang ang affected. And dun sa police power naman, ang affected is the community or a class of individuals. Anong effect ng taxation? Okay? Of course, the money contributed becomes part of the public funds. So, yung mga makakolektang pera, which is the so-called taxes or the enforced contribution, okay, it will be part of the public funds. Para naman sa eminent domain, ma'am, anong mangyayari? What is the effect? Okay? The private property, okay, will be converted into public use. And there is so-called transfer of rights. Okay? Sa police power naman, there is no transfer of title, of course. At most, there is the so-called restraint or restriction only on the injurious use of the property. Okay? We already discussed the differences. Now, we go to the principles of sound tax system. There are 3. Shortcut here is the FAT. Okay? FAT. Principles of a sound tax system. First one is the fiscal adequacy. Okay? Accordingly, in fiscal adequacy, the sources of revenue must be sufficient or it must be adequate, okay, to meet the government expenditures and their variation regardless of business conditions. So, dapat daw po na yung sources of tax revenue should coincide with or it must adequate or sufficient and approximate the needs of the government expenditures. So here, the revenue should be elastic enough or it must be capable of expanding to cover or to cover all the expenses of the public. Dapat enough yung pera ng gobyerno to cover the expenses of the government. Number 2, okay? From the word adequacy, di ba? Fiscal adequacy, fiscal or money, and adequacy meaning adequate or sufficient. So, the money must be sufficient. Number 2 is the administrative feasibility. Ano naman ito? Okay? Here, tax laws should be capable of convenient, just, and effective administration. They should be clear, concise, and capable of proper and economic enforcement, convenient as to time and manner of payment, and not burdensome. Here, ang sabi dito, okay, administrative feasibility. Dapat it must be feasible. Okay? Dapat daw ang mga tax laws, mga batas na about taxes, okay, it must be convenient, it must be just and effective administration. Okay? It must not unduly burdensome or hindi dapat to pabigat and hindi dapat to nagdi-discourage sa mga business activities. Okay? Number 3, or the third one, is the theoretical justice or equality. Here, okay, the tax burden should be in proportionate to the so-called taxpayer's ability to pay. Okay? This is the ability to pay principle. Taxation should be uniform as well as equitable. The state must evolve a progressive system of taxation. Okay? Always remember this one, na The non-observance of the above principles will not necessarily render tax laws or the tax imposed invalid, except when, to the extent that those specific constitutional limitations are violated. So, ang ibig sabihin po nito, okay, kung ang na-violate mo is fiscal adequacy or administrative feasibility, it will not invalidate the tax law. Okay? Pero kung ang na-violate mo is yung theoretical justice, which is the ability of the taxpayer to pay, okay, it will render the tax law unconstitutional. We now go to the different inherent and constitutional limitations on taxation. When we say inherent, again, it is already embedded, it is already there from the very first or from the very beginning. It's basic, it is very important, okay? Inherent limitations. The following are the inherent limitations of taxation. There are 5. It must be public purpose, it is inherently legislative, it is territorial in nature, international committee, and exemption of government entities, agencies, and instrumentalities. Medyo na-discuss ko na yan a while back, pero discuss natin ulit. First, again, we have the so-called public purpose. Okay? Always remember that the proceeds of the tax must be used for the support of the state or for some recognized objects of the government or directly to promote the welfare of the community. We have different tests used to determine whether or not the purpose is public. Okay? First is the so-called duty test. Ano tong duty test? Okay? Under the duty test, okay, it is a test applied when there is a need to determine the public purpose of the tax, whether or not the appropriation or expenditure of public funds is related to the duty of the state as a government. Okay? Here, under the duty test, whether the thing to be furthered by the appropriation of the public revenue is something which is the duty of the state as a government to provide. Sa promotion of general welfare test naman, okay? The question is whether the proceeds of the tax will directly promote the welfare of the community in equal measure. So, the promotion of general welfare test is a test used when there is a need to determine kung there is a need to determine that the purpose, public purpose is in a tax measure, whether the law providing for it directly promotes the welfare of the community in equal measure. Okay? Kung sa duty test is, ang tanong is, ito ba ay duty ng government? If yes, sige, that is public purpose. Sa general welfare test naman, ang tanong is, para ba ito sa ikabubuti ng mga tao? If yes, that is public purpose. And lastly, of course, is the character of direct object of the expenditure. In here, it is the essential character of the direct object of the expenditure which must determine its validity as justifying a tax and not the magnitude of the interest to be affected, nor the degree to which the general advantage of the community and thus the public welfare may be ultimately benefited by their promotion. Next, we go with the second limitation, which is inherently legislative. Again, the general rule is that delegated powers can no longer be delegated. Okay? Again, we had already discussed this one, that only the legislative power has the inherent power to exercise taxation, while the sanggunian of the city, municipality, and panlalawigan, and the barangays, okay, and of course the President of the Philippines, they have the delegated power to exercise taxation. inherent ang legislative, while yung na-mention ko, awalabak lang, is delegated. Next. Always remember that the legislature or the legislative department has the power to determine what kind or what is the nature of the tax, what is the purpose, kung what is the extent, the coverage, or kung sino ba ang objects, business ba to, mga tao ba to, property ba to, kanan. And the situs or the place of taxation, kung saan. Okay? Next one is International Committee. In International Committee, committee is the respect accorded by the nations to each other because they are sovereign equals. Okay? And when we say committee, okay, it is the in here there is a friendship, kumbaga there's the harmony or courtesy between the parties or between the countries. So the property or income of a foreign state or government may not be subjected to taxation by another state. So for example, may international committee between US and the Philippines. Example lang po, kung hindi na-tax yung mga Pinoy sa Amerika, ang equivalent niyan is yung mga Amerikano sa Pilipinas ay hindi na rin sila masasubject sa the same or similar na tax exempted doon sa mga Pilipinong nasa US. The reason, we had the so-called in par in parem non habet imperium. Okay? This is the doctrine of sovereign equality among states under the international law. So, when one state, okay, in here, one state cannot exercise its sovereign powers over another. Meaning, all states, lahat ng mga states, including the smallest to the least influential, and to the highest or the largest, okay, country, they are also entitled to their dignity and the protection of their honor and reputation. The last limitation is the exemption of government entities, agencies, and instrumentality. So the general rule, okay, that agencies and instrumentalities of the government are exempt from taxes or taxation. So their exemption rests on the state's sovereign immunity from taxation. Okay, the state cannot be taxed without its consent, and such consent being in derogation of its sovereignty is to be strictly construed. Kasi nga, parang kung tataksan mo ang gobyerno, okay, kumbaga, kukuha ka sa bulsa mo sa left, ilalagay mo lang din sa right. That is the simplest explanation nun. But that is only the general rule. Okay? That is only the general rule. What are the exemptions? Okay? Accordingly, ang sabi sa batas, the exemption, okay, if the exemption applies only to government entities through which the government immediately and directly exercises its sovereign powers. So, with respect to GOCC or the government-owned and controlled corporations that is proprietary in nature, meaning not governmental yung function nila, they are subject to tax unless exempted. So, the general rule is that yung mga national government agencies and instrumentalities, exempted sila yan. Pero, okay, remember, pero, kung isa silang GOCC at not governmental yung functions nila, kumbaga kumikita talaga sila, okay, they will not be subjected to tax. except, of course, there is a, they are exempted. Can the local government units, okay, levy tax on the national government? Of course not, okay? This is provided under RA 7160. Remember that there are the so-called GOCC or government-owned and controlled corporations exercising proprietary nature or not governmental. Okay? That are exempted. Diba kasasabi ko kanina nga, pag national government agency or instrumentalities, general rule, okay, they are exempted. Kasi nga, parang kukuha ka lang ng pera sa left mo, tapos ilalagay mo lang din sa right. As an exemption, okay, is kung isa kang GOCC or government-owned and controlled corporation, exercising proprietary, meaning not governmental yung purpose mo. Okay? Kumikita ka talaga, may income generating yung yung agency nyo, you are taxable. Kasi nga, hindi ka naman talaga governmental yung purpose mo, kundi pang income generating na proprietary na talaga. Pero there are some GOCCs that are exempted kahit na proprietary ang nature nila. Which are the following. Number 1, the GSIS or the Government Service Insurance System. Number 2, the Social Security System. Number 3, the PhilHealth or yung Philippine Health Insurance Corporation or the PHIC. And number 4, the Philippine Charity Sweepstakes Office, the PCSO. Right? Yung mga loto-loto, yan. Mga PhilHealth. Okay? How about question? Is there a constitutional prohibition against the government taxing itself? There's none. Okay? This is in the case of 105 Phil 338. Let's go now to the constitutional limitations naman. Okay, there are many. Dami-dami. Okay? Yan. Hindi ko na isa-isahin to. Kindly read na lang ito for your assignment na lang ito. Constitutional limitations, but I will just give you a very brief reading or explanation. Those provisions which provisions directly affecting taxation and indirectly affecting direct and indirect. Okay? Number 1, against sorry guys, this is na lang, more of reading assignment. Medyo naman ito, self-explanatory. Okay? I will give you the second part of my discussion later. Thank you for listening.